Hi everyone, this is my short video review on the Friday the 13th movie from 1980 for Christian's channel. In a way, I'm glad to be redoing these again because back in 2017, when I did the podcast Retrospective with Christian and Jeremy, looking back, I felt like I did not do much of a good job commenting on these movies and then all there to say about the franchise. After seeing the same format so many times, what else is there to say about a bunch of stupid dumb teens going to Camp Crystal Lake, having sex, smoking pot, skinny dipping, and then get slaughtered by Jason? The final virgin survives. The end. In the 1980s, the slasher subgenre was big and popular. Horror fans love seeing the same format over and over again, and not just the Friday the 13th movies, any slasher movie in general in the 80s. Like for example, April Fool's Day, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Final Exam, My Bloody Valentine, Prom Night, Terror Train, etc., etc. The list goes on and on. I'll admit, when I was a teenager, after getting into horror movies, I used to like watching the Friday the 13th movies. But as I've gotten older, they don't hold up for me like they used to. At the same time, there's still some like little nostalgia for me to a certain degree. But the first Friday the 13th movie does not hold up for me the same way for like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm not saying that I hate this movie or the series, but yes, I'll admit I own the entire series on Blu-ray. I got this as a birthday present for myself recently. I will say, rewatching the series, I watched the behind-the-scenes deleted scenes that were considered to be too gross, and were cut from the movie because of the MPA restrictions. It was cool watching like the bonus features on the Blu-rays, watching interviews of the actors, writers, producers, and directors. I highly recommend this Blu-ray set of the Friday the 13th franchise. After the success of the first Halloween movie, this movie, while may not be the first Halloween knockoff or rip-off, it was one of the first early rip-offs of trying to be on the same level as Halloween, but it tried a little bit too hard to a certain degree. Friday the 13th was written and directed by Sean S. Cunningham, who prior to this was a producer for Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left. Friday the 13th was written by Victor Miller. The original title of this movie was going to be called A Long Night at Camp Blood, but Sean S. Cunningham suggested to Victor Miller to change it to Friday the 13th. Just like Halloween, Friday the 13th was shot under a small budget, then it was distributed by Paramount. As a kid, before I saw this movie and the rest of the series, I was very familiar with who Jason Voorhees was. He's another one of those horror icons. If you never saw the movie or the series, you know who Jason Voorhees, especially that hockey mask has become so iconic for his look. When people think of hockey mask, they think of the sport hockey, but for me, when I see hockey mask, my first thought is Jason Voorhees, but that's just me. My first viewing of this movie was October 2009. After marathoning all the Halloween movies, my next phase was watching all the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street movies to watch Freddy vs. Jason. Well, as I said before, I don't hate this movie. Like I said, it basically takes the same idea as Halloween, but this is Halloween done in the summertime. Halloween took place in the fall, Friday the 13th took place in the summer, at a camp in the middle of nowhere. That's a good concept, actually, when you think about it. Even the writers and director admitted they were going for a Halloween knockoff. After Halloween's success, everyone wanted to rip it off and make their own mock version of Halloween around this time. The opening resembles Halloween. Two counselors were having sex and then they were killed by an unknown killer that we don't see. It becomes like a whodunit type of film. Then it jumps to a few years later. Camp Crystal Lake is being reopened, but the people that died are warned that young teen hitchhiker girl not to go there. And the difference is there's no Dr. Loomis type of character in this movie like in Halloween. The character Alice is an okay character, not one of my favorite final girls. When I was rewatching this movie, I never realized how there was like a hint of Steve and Alice were secretly romantically involved, especially the way he touched her. The other characters are like cliche stereotypes, and we know he's gonna live and die. This movie's slow at times. When we see a full demonstration of Alice making coffee, that part could have been cut out. It would not affect the movie at all. But this movie taught me how to make coffee. Thank you for that demonstration. The part where one of the counselors is cleaning up, she's right by the archery and someone shoots an arrow at her face. Thankfully he misses. It was a prank, but still, dude, you could have killed her. That guy was such a dick, it's not even funny. The crazy part is it foreshadows her death later on in this movie. A very young and unknown Kevin Bacon was in this movie. Another actor who starred in a horror movie later became a famous actor after that. Tom Savini did the special effects. Always good to see him do his magic. I like the Kevin Bacon's death scene in this movie. When I first saw this movie, I did not see the big twist coming, thinking because of the franchise main character's reputation. I thought Jason Voorhees was the killer. Did not expect to see that his mother, Pamela Voorhees, was the killer. And that later on in the series, Jason Voorhees will become the main killer throughout the entire series. The finale fight scene between Alice and Pamela is good. It's intense. You root for Alice to kick the shit out of Mrs. Voorhees to get out. Betsy Palmer does do a good job in this movie as Pamela Voorhees. Definitely a really good horror villain in a horror movie. Despite Pamela Voorhees being a scary character, you can understand and empathize with her why she's killing these camp counselors. Her son Jason drowned while the camp counselors were not paying attention, being neglectful because they were having sex. You understand why she's killing these camp counselors. At the same time, when you think about it, these camp counselors had nothing to do with Jason Voorhees drowning because either A, they were not alive, or B, they could have been children around the time when Jason Voorhees drowned at Camp Crystal Lake back in 1958. But that does not matter to Pamela. She thinks in her mind that all these young teen counselors should die. Not only did Friday the 13th rip off Halloween, they also ripped off Psycho in reverse. It's like if Norman Bates' mother was the killer instead of Norman Bates. Just like Psycho, Mrs. Voorhees seems to have a split personality disorder when she speaks to herself, hearing her son's Jason's voice saying, "Kill her, Mommy! Kill her!" Betsy Palmer's the one good part in this movie, as the highlight is Pamela Voorhees. The music score also resembled Bernard Herrmann's score to Psycho when you think about it. Just listen to both soundtracks back to back and compare the soundtracks. Just like Norman Bates at first, he seemed nice and friendly and harmless, but when he talks about his mother, we see how he has mental issues. Pamela Voorhees seemed nice, but then we see that she was the killer the whole time. Despite Mrs. Voorhees being the killer in this movie, we don't really see, she doesn't show up until the end of the movie, so it's kind of debatable whether you would call this a shock or not. If she was introduced early in the film, then it would have been a good twist right here. She explains why she kills the counselor as punishment for not paying attention to her son that drowned. The counselors were having sex instead of looking after her son, Jason. When she mentioned this, she gets mad and batshit crazy. Jason may not be the killer in this movie, but it does make a brief cameo at the end, setting up for the rest of the series. The ending is not bad, but I wish it ended on a cliffhanger where no one survived, just like Night of the Living Dead, when Jason pops and grabs Alice on the boat, but instead it cuts to her in the recovery room, and it was only a dream. She claims to have seen Jason, but the police don't believe her. It kind of felt like they were going for like it was all in her head type of thing. As I said before, I don't hate this movie or the series. It just doesn't hold up for me like it used to when I was a teenager. I haven't really seen myself going back to rewatch this series unless I'm in a specific mood. I hope you like my comments, and hopefully this was a semi-improvement from 2017. Here are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 2. As usual with any first horror movie, when it makes money and it's a big success, they figured, let's make a sequel and let's franchise the character. This is the first movie where Jason was the killer. As I said before in the last video, the point of ending of the first movie is to have it set up where Jason is the killer throughout the rest of the series. The first movie was Pamela Voorhees' movie. This time it was Jason's movie. It also made me want to imagine if Pamela Voorhees was the killer throughout the entire series. Would we not have Freddy vs. Jason? Would it have been Freddy vs. Pamela? Or would it have been no Freddy vs. movie? Or maybe Freddy vs. Michael Myers or Pinhead instead, but who knows. I wish the character Alice was kept alive, but because around this time the actress had some crazy stalker at the time, that is why she's got her screen time short and have her character be killed off 5 minutes in the opening scene. If they wanted to kill off her character, maybe it could have been done later, like where she tries to save Jeannie from Jason, but again, there was a reason why Alice was killed off early in this movie for that reason. It makes sense for Jason to kill off Alice because Alice killed Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, in the last movie. This is another Psycho reference. Marion Crane was killed early in the movie, so was Alice, something they have in common. It was directed by Steve Miner. When I first saw this movie, I was familiar with him because he would go on to direct Halloween H2O a decade later. As I said before, that's my favorite Halloween sequel. He's probably the only director I can think of who directed a Halloween, a Friday the 13th movie. Steve Miner also directed Friday the 13th Part 3, which I'll talk about next. Steve Meyer directed an episode of Smallville and directed 9 episodes of The Wonder Years, some of my favorite TV shows. Unlike Halloween, which had recurring characters of Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode, who knew about Michael Myers, from here onward, each movie created new characters and did not always bring back the same characters from the last movie, except for Tommy Jarvis, which I'll talk about soon. Crazy Ralph's another recurring character from the last movie. He dies in this movie. The movie copies the same format as the first movie, this time Jason is the killer. It has the same tone, it's a follow-up sequel from the last movie. Again, just like the first movie, it's a little bit slow at first, but then it picks up the last half when Jean and her boyfriend fight Jason. The finale was okay and decent, but not as good as the first movie finale when Alice and Pamela fight. Jason continues his mom's legacy in killing any more counselors who go to Camp Crystal Lake. Once again, the characters are nothing special or well written, but I did think Amy Steele as Jeannie was slight semi-accurate to Alice, but that's just my opinion. This is the kind of movie that has B-movie quality. This is not an Academy Award material, that's for sure. In the last movie, it was hinted Alice and Steve were in a possible secret relationship. In this movie, they gave it out right away. Especially how Jeannie shows up late, her boyfriend gets mad at her for being late, then they kiss. I guess they cannot resist or stand to be mad at each other for that long. On the Blu-ray set I have, they have an interview with Amy Steele she did on a podcast. I highly recommend you go check that out if you ever own this on Blu-ray. Just like the first movie, another dude pranks a girl he likes, but again, he's such a dick. He slingshots a rock at her behind while she's walking in the woods. Later she goes skinny dipping, then he steals her clothes. Again, what a jerk. He gets his punishment when he gets caught in a trap hanging upside down. Jason slits his throat. I'm not gonna lie, this actress was hot. It's weird seeing her wear a Mickey Mouse t-shirt. Then again, the Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse cartoon shirt ended up in the public domain. They're making the Disney Mickey Mouse slasher movies recently. I like the campfire scene where the guy is telling the story of Jason Voorhees like an urban legend type of story. But then again, I always like scenes like that in movies, campfire scenes. I did like the scene where Jason finds Jeannie wearing Jason's mother's shirt and pretending to be her so she can kill him. This part was very clever. I guess Jason can only see a reflection of his mom and cannot see Jeannie. When Jeannie finds Jason's mother decapitated head, it reminds me of Psycho when Marion Crane's sister finds Nora Bates' decomposed body in the basement. Instead of a whole body, it was Pamela Voorhees' head. This scene's been pointed out by fans with a little bit of psychology on why Jason kills. Seeing Jason wear a sag was kind of lame, but at the same time, they did not think at the time of the hockey mask yet. That was not established yet when this movie was made. When people see this movie, it will be hard for them to sink their teeth into not realize that before the hockey mask, this is one of the first Jason Voorhees designs. Jason's sack mask looks identical to the killer in the 1976 horror movie, The House That Dreaded Sundown. I've never seen that movie, but I can see the resemblance a little bit right here. Jason Voorhees looked like a zombie deformed farmer hillbilly. Jason Voorhees is like a man-child in this movie, similar to Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The shack he lives in the middle of nowhere is almost similar to how Leatherface lives in a home in the middle of nowhere in Texas. It seems like Jason Voorhees grows up fast. People point out Jason as a zombie. Because he drowned but no explanation how he came back from the dead is unexplained. Not like how Frankenstein's monsters reanimated. I met Steve Dash in 2013 at Monster Mania. That was the first year I went to Monster Mania. But sadly, I don't have a photo meeting the guy. Despite he played Jason throughout the majority of the movie, Warrington Gillette played Jason unmasked. I also understand how they say Jason Voorhees drowned, yet they say he survived and was living in the woods for years. Either maybe I'm not seeing or thinking too much into that. Not only did Jeannie survive, but the dog Muffin also survives. Muffin! Well, it's not perfect, not one of my favorite sequels of the series. It had some okay highlight moments. Here are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 3. It was cool to see Jason finally wear his famous signature hockey mask for the first time in the series. When I did a little research on this movie, it seems like back in the 80s with horror franchises, around this time when it came to the third movie, they were coming out in 3D. This is the only Friday movie to be shot in 3D. I guess they really wanted to make 3D popular for fans and see how audiences would react to 3D movies. On the Blu-ray disc, you have the option to watch this movie in 3D or 2D, but sadly it did not come with 3D glasses, and I'm not sure why that is. But honestly, this is a movie I don't need to watch in 3D. I'm not much of a 3D person, it bothers my eyes. The last two movies I've ever seen in 3D in a movie theater were the Avatar movies, but that's a completely different story. Also, as my dad has told me, you need a special equipment to watch movies in 3D, but I'll survive. I will say it was weird when I was watching this on the 2D. The shots of the yo-yo sticking a knife in the face, or the eye popping out shots are obviously 3D effects and kind of weird. I can only imagine what this was like to see in a movie theater back in the 80s in 3D for the experience. The flashback when Chris explained that she encountered Jason Voorhees in the past, when did this happen in between the last movies? It seemed like this was another kind of movie where it was about facing your fears. Yeah, I've seen this concept done better in other movies. The final fight between Chris and Jason was shot at a barn. The last two movies were shot near the lake in a small cabin. Also, day for night. In the first two finales, it was in the dark. Chris fights Jason at night and in the daytime. The character Shelly was annoying, kind of a jerk playing pranks, but it's weird how you rooted for him to get a girl when he gets rejected. We've all been there, done that, minus doing pranks. What a pisser. Unless Shelly wanted to be on Impractical Jokers. The actor who plays Shell looks like Seth Rogen a little bit. Probably because of the bushy hair. The part when Shell and Vera are at a convenience store, they come across these gang bikers that come out of nowhere and bully them for no reason. It was funny when Shelley and Vera are in the car, he drives the car in reverse, and he accidentally hits the gang's motorcycles. Payback's a bitch. But thanks to Shelley is the reason why Jason has his famous iconic hockey mask. When Jason kills him, they think it was Shelly doing another prank. Because Jason slit his throat, Shelly could not speak, and it was too late to save Shelly. Richard Berger's a good Jason. He doesn't get enough attention or talk about his performance as Jason Voorhees. It seems like Jason grew more than the last movie. He looks a little bit like the Incredible Hulk, more muscular. Jason Voorhees' look was an upgrade from the last movie where he looked like a hillbilly, but no explanation how Jason went bald that fast. In the last movie, Jason got hit in the shoulder with a machete. He must be a fast healer that's unexplained. Once again, they make another reference to Psycho when the girl's in the shower after having sex on a hammock. I thought it was kind of funny how the couple managed to try to figure out how could they still have sex on a hammock, and will it be in the history books for being the first couple to have sex on a hammock? I highly doubt that. Anyway, after the sex, the boy was about to get beer for his girlfriend, just like in Halloween. This movie takes place one day after Part 2. I wish they had brought back Jeannie from Part 2. I read they originally wanted to bring back Jeannie facing off against Jason Voorhees and facing her fears, but this original story idea was scrapped because Amy Steele decided not to reprise the role as Jeannie again for this movie for whatever reason. They originally wanted this movie to take place in a insane asylum where Jeannie is taken after she fights Jason Voorhees, and no one would believe her, and that Jason would follow her to the insane asylum and try to kill her again. A little Halloween 2 vibes right there. It had some very interesting creative kills, like Jason killing Chabe Guy doing a headstand, Jason shoots a girl in the eye with a spear gun, Jason squeezes a guy's head until his eye pops out is cool. They copy the same ending as the first movie, but this time Jason's dead mother's zombie pops up and grabs Chris by the boat. But again, it was all a dream, and it may have all been in her head. When Chris survives, she laughs out loud hysterically when she is escorted by the police. Her laugh reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre when Sally escapes Leatherface. She laughs out loud hysterically because she survived the horrific event. I'm not sure if this is a setup for the next movie where she could be the killer, but I could be reading too deep into this. Again, not one of my favorites of the series, just an alright movie. It's one I rarely go back to rewatch. The characters are mediocre, some memorable and some forgetful, and not interesting. Watching in 2D does not hold up that well. This is the kind of movie that horror fans just watch to see Jason kill the victims. Here are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. This was originally intended to be the final Friday movie, but we as an audience are smart enough to not fall for that. Despite, as I said before, not being a big die-hard fan of the Friday the 13th series, this is one of the good sequels and one of my favorites of the series. With the opening recap of the last movies in Part 3, where Jason was taken to a morgue. The movie seems to take place on Saturday the 15th, but what month, who knows. The point is, this movie takes place 2 days after the third movie. The opening, we see a guy watching an exercise videotape called Aerobicize, which is really an 80s exercise videotape. But honestly, it looked like a porn movie, even though it was not porn. I guess this turned him on for sex. As usual, he's a jerk to the girl. He likes playing pranks on her. Then Jason kills him. I guess it's another rule to add to survive horror movies. Don't watch porn, huh? And of course, Jason kills the nurse. These characters have little personality, a little bit more of an arc compared to the last movie. In the last movie, the characters were forgetful for me. This movie had some unknown actors who would later become teen icons of the 80s. Crispin Glover, this movie came out first, and 1 year later he was in Back to the Future where he played George McFly, Marty McFly's father. He's basically the kind of character that you root for to get laid after getting dumped by his ex-girlfriend when he's heartbroken. It's fun when he asks the girl to dance, and his dance is a little funny, he's rocking it out. He was trying too hard to impress the twin girl he has a crush on. I met Julia Ronson last October in 2022. She signed me a picture autograph saying, "Kiss me, you fool." I'm not gonna lie, not to get off topic, when I first saw this movie as a teenager, part of me had a little crush on her. She was nice and sweet to talk to. To me, she's one of my favorite Friday girls, even though she's not the final girl in the movie. Also, I will say, she still looks beautiful today. She was in John Hughes' 1980s teen comedy Weird Science 1 year later. Also, when I met Julia Ronson, I said to her, sorry for the loss of Ted White, because around this time period, Ted White had passed away when I met her. There was a love triangle between her boyfriend and one of the twin sisters. As a joke, this is too easy for me. I go with Julia Ronson. When I first read about the movie's production, how when they shot Julia Ronson's death scene, it was shot in the wintertime. She felt so cold, developing hypothermia. It was hard for her to do the kill scene in the cold. The director was such a jerk to her. Ted White, despite playing a ruthless evil killer on set, he was very kind to Judy and stood up to her. He almost quit the movie because of the director's behavior towards her. Lawrence Monsoon prior to this was in The Last American Virgin, which I've never seen before. He was also in the movie Mask with Eric Stoltz as one of Rocky Dennis's friends. This guy always gets high all the time. He's the only character in the movie that did not get laid in this movie. This is one of the few Friday the 13th movies where one of the victims killed by Jason Voorhees did not have sex, do drugs, drink, or skinny dip. This girl was a hitchhiker with no name and was killed by Jason while she was eating a banana. It's true they say, not all of Jason's victims must have sex to die. Jason kills everyone for no reason. Not only does Jason go after a bunch of teenagers, he also goes after the Jarvis family for no reason. The character brought up by Eric Anderson, we find that he's the older brother of Sandra, who died in part 2. He's out to set revenge on Jason because he killed his younger sister, which I thought was a good idea for his character arc, and it makes sense. Now, this is a slasher movie, it has a little bit of a revenge thriller to it. Despite having a good motive and a good arc, but unfortunately his character gets killed off. He did not survive this movie. Tom Savini's back doing the special effects again, which is awesome and great. But sadly, the MPAA forced the editors to cut out the gross-out special effect kills. You can watch them on the Blu-ray. It stinks how they had to cut the gore out of this movie, because it shows how very talented of a guy he really is, Tom Savini. Corey Feldman does a good job as Tommy Jarvis. He's just your basic average ordinary kid who seems to have a talent and loves making monster masks. I wasn't talented doing this, but as a kid, I did have a fascination with horror masks, like I did as a kid, and I still do to some degree to this day. People have said Feldman's portrayal as Tommy Jarvis in this movie is a reference and tribute to a young Tom Savini as a kid, but done in a fictionalized way. His character goes from child innocence to seeing naked girls across his room to the next house and fighting Jason, taking away his innocence. It's a little funny when he's chasing his dog and he sees the teen skinny dipping by the lake, then his older sister tells him to look away. Out of all the Friday movies, this one probably has the most nudity in it. I grew up watching Corey Feldman on The Goonies and Stand By Me. I never knew this was one of his early movies before his big breakout in the 80s, being an 80s icon. It'd be cool if they got him for a cameo on Stranger Things. Also, I loved him in The Lost Boys too. This was the first time a kid would be in one of the main characters in a Friday the 13th movie. Ted White does a good job as Jason, one of my favorite Jason actors. He was very dark and brutal. Ted White had a great career as a stuntman. He was on an X-Files episode as a gas station man. When I watched interviews of him on the Blu-ray, Ted White said he did not like working with Corey Feldman, thinking that he was a spoiled brat. In a weird way, he said it worked for him to make the movie more effective in his performance as Jason Voorhees. Despite Ted White being one of the best stuntman actors who played Jason Voorhees by the fans, he's admitted many times that he hated playing the part of Jason Voorhees. During the making of this movie, He refused to talk to the actors, thinking that they would not be afraid of him as Jason. The unmasking Jason makeup effect is good despite Jason looks different from the last two movies. It's a little bit of a continuity error, especially as this movie takes place a few days after the events in Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3. But I accept it for what it is and forgive that. The real highlight of this movie is when Jason fights Tommy Jarvis. When Tommy shaves his head off to look like Jason when he was a kid, then he attacks and kills Jason like a crazy child psycho murderer. It's very grotesque to see Jason's head get slit. Despite what I said before, the MPA cut out a lot of the kill gore scenes, and yet they kept this part in for some reason in the movie. The MPA have no idea what they want, are just a bunch of morons. It ends on a cliffhanger note where Tommy looks at the camera where he might be the new killer. If this is the last one, it could have been a good finale to the series. But again, we all know that turns out, if it makes money, they push it to the limit to make more sequels. Here's my comment on A New Beginning. As I said before, we don't fall for when they claim the last movie, and despite liking Friday the 13th, the final chapter, this one is the opposite for me. This one I'm not too crazy about. The actor who played Tommy in this movie was so bland and forgetful. He takes a backseat in this movie. He's not the main focus like I thought he was going to be. One would think after the way the last movie ended that Tommy would be the main focus of this movie. If Tommy was the main focus in this movie, I would have liked to see him in therapy where he works with a psychiatrist who is analyzing him, and he tries to help Tommy overcome his fear as best as possible. Seeing how Tommy has PTSD from that traumatic experience when he killed Jason has really haunted him. The parts when he hallucinates, thinking that Jason is there, but he's not, and that it's all in his head. I miss Corey Feldman as Tommy Jarvis, but around this time, Corey Feldman was filming The Goonies, around the same time as this movie was being made. He only has one scene at the beginning in a dream sequence, but who knows, just make a Friday movie ignoring the other sequels, and just have Corey Feldman back as Tommy Jarvis. This is where the movie fails. Too many side minor characters that are not that important to the story. The characters are bland, lame, cliche. At least in the last movie, the characters had personality and were semi-likable to a certain degree. None of these characters are memorable. There are no characters to relate to in this movie. It has too many subplots that don't add up or not that too important to the story. Like, for instance, when the guy who stutter confesses he wants to make love to a girl he likes, then she laughs at him, doesn't take him seriously. Like the guy in Airplane said, what a pisser. Side note, when I was rewatching this movie, being a fan of Turner Classic Movies, I noticed they were watching A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor. That's a really good movie, and I wish I was talking about that movie instead of this movie. Also, that girl who constantly listens to music on her headphones and does a robot dance, again, not important to the story. The characters Ethel and her son were annoying, over-the-top, stupid, and ridiculous. It was like combining Psycho characters, Norma Bates, with the characters from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Put them together, you get these two annoying characters who die and don't give a crap about. Ethel's son was a big man baby who had a lot of issues and really needed serious professional help. It's gotten so cliche for me, you already predicted Noah's gonna live and die because they keep breaking the rules. This movie tried too hard not knowing they wanted to make this into a dark comedy. It was kind of funny when Demon, played by Miguel A. Nunez, after eating some bad enchiladas, he had to take a huge massive shit, then Jason kills him. Don't eat bad food in a horror movie that makes you have to take a huge shit. Demon's younger brother Reggie is an alright character, but annoying at times. But he can be a badass kid when he fights the guy we think is Jason. He develops a small friendship with Tommy. I wish the movie explored their friendship a little bit more. The actor Shavar Ross who plays Reggie, you all might recognize him from Family Matters. When that character Joey offers chocolate bars, he doesn't take a hint. He gets axed by a guy who has anger management issues over a stupid candy bar. One of the few kills on a Friday movie sequel not done by Jason. Tina's played by Debbie Sue Voorhees. She's probably one of the few Friday actors whose last name is Voorhees. This must be a rare thing for a horror movie. I'm not gonna lie, she was hot. Another one of my favorite Friday girls who's not a final girl. Her sex scene was very exploited. out of all the sex scenes in a Friday movie. After this movie, she quit acting and became a school teacher. I'm not sure what level of education school she taught at, but from what I read and learned, the school she worked at found out about her sex scene in this movie, and she ended up getting fired because of this scene in the movie. This movie ruined her reputation for ever working as a teacher in a school. Danny Steinman, the director of this movie, was a porn director before directing Hollywood movies. He was originally supposed to be signed on to direct the next Friday the 13th movie, but he got into a motorcycle accident and was unable to direct the next Friday the 13th movie. He was originally supposed to direct a sequel to Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left, but the project never went through and was cancelled. This movie has 20 kills. This makes it the largest body kill count in the Friday the 13th series. Also, once again, when you don't see the kills, special effects thanks to the MPAA, to too many jump cuts on the kills. But again, you can watch the deleted scenes on the Blu-rays of this movie. The bell kill is the only one you see. Sorry for my spoiler right here. I'll respect if you edit this part out, Christian. What was the point of calling this movie Friday the 13th if Jason was not the killer? If some random guy was impersonating Jason just because his son was killed over a stupid chocolate bar? This sounds like something a 4th grader wrote. This part was so stupid and dumb. This felt like the version of Halloween 3 where no Jason was not in this movie because he was dead. Some guy impersonated him. It's not explained why Roy impersonates Jason or what the connection he has with Jason. Did he have a fascination reading about the Jason Voorhees murders? I'm probably overanalyzing this. Roy put the dead bodies in Tommy's room where I guess he was going to frame Tommy, and people believe that Tommy was the one responsible for committing the murders. Despite Roy was impersonating Jason, he was played by Tom Morgan in the scenes where Jason kills and Tommy's hallucinations. In the opening scene, Jason was played by John Huck. Weird that I would know Jason in this movie and Roy was impersonating Jason, and yet he was played by 2 different stuntmen in this movie. Despite Jason is dead and not in this movie with someone impersonating Jason, and yet these 2 stuntmen are still credited as Jason somehow, who cares? Don't question it. Moving on. I once met Melanie Keeneman back in 2013 at Chiller Theater. She was very nice. She told me she was offered to come back for the next one, but said she did not like the script. Despite she plays the final girl in this movie, she's not that interesting or memorable. I find her very forgetful every time I watch this movie, and she's not one of my favorite final girls in the Friday movies. The movie ends on a ridiculous cliffhanger where, like Halloween 4, where Tommy Jarvis is in the hospital, and he wears the hockey mask, and it's implied that Tommy Jarvis might become the killer in the next movie. But of course, whatever original ideas were thought of for this part went out the window in the next movie, and it's never brought up or mentioned again in the later series. Before I move on to Jason Lives, as I was re-editing making tweaks and changes on the Friday the 13th franchise video, I did a little research. Apparently there's an indie movie called 13 Fanboys. It was written and directed by Deborah Sue Voorhees. It's about an obsessed Friday the 13th fan who stalks the actors who were in the Friday the 13th franchise, and he kills them off one by one. I have never heard or seen this before, but for what I read, I might check it out for curiosity, and it sounds interesting. I'm not sure it's on any streaming services or any physical media on DVD or Blu-ray. I'll have to look into that. A complete mess that had semi-potential and interesting ideas, but sadly this movie failed and was a disappointment. I know that some fans like this as a guilty pleasure for the funny, goofy, over the top, that's fine. Me, not so much. I can leave this movie behind. It can be a letdown and disappointment that Jason was not the killer for some fans. A movie I watch on rare occasions and forget about the characters, and then I move on after that. Here are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Jason Lives. The opening scene where Tommy and his friend are going to the cemetery to double check to make sure Jason is dead. Seeing lightning strike Jason, bring him back to life, felt like Frankenstein's monster. And the cemetery scene reminded me of the opening scene of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, when 2 grave robbers robbed Lawrence Talbot's grave. The director Tom McLaughlin said on the Blu-ray interview that's what he was going for, paying tribute to classic Universal monsters. It's also funny they spoofed James Bond. Instead of a gun, he used a machete to slash the audience, breaking the 4th wall. After a cool, nice visual opening scene that has more atmosphere, not exploitation, again, just like A New Beginning, boring cliche characters, I could not care less about these characters. It's stale, flat, it doesn't do anything different, just the same old stuff Jason has done in the last 5 movies. These new characters stink. As I said before, one would think after the way the last movie ended, they would have gone the direction where Tommy Jarvis would be the killer in this movie. Just like Halloween 4 with Jamie Lloyd, they threw this idea out the window. It's also never explained what happened to Pam and whether or not she survived being attacked by Tommy in the hospital. Because Jason was not the killer in the last movie, fans were disappointed in The New Beginning, and they want to see Jason come back and as the killer in another Friday the 13th sequel. Just like New Beginning, this one also has a fan following because of its cheesy, goofy, over-the-top jokes. I guess for me it did not work that well for me, but that's just my own opinion. There are some cheesy horror movies I like, but it has to be on a certain level that really tickles me. Or I need to be in a specific mood or a cheesy horror comedy. Like, for example, I really do love Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, because those are supposed to be intentionally funny, over-the-top movies, and are not meant to be taken seriously. Whether you'll agree with me or don't like me for saying this, or X-murder me, nah, I'm just kidding. I like the Scream movie because it's supposed to be a parody of slasher movies. But they are not cheesy or extremely goofy. To me, Scream has that balance of horror and a little bit of horror comedy to it. I also like Peter Jackson's Dead Alive. George Romero's Creepshow has dark comedy inspired from the old EC horror comic books. The movie parodies itself when this couple are driving in the middle of the night. They spot Jason, the girls say, "I've seen enough horror movies to know that any weirdo that wears a mask is not friendly." They break the fourth wall the minute they are in a horror movie. Once again, the MPA just don't learn to stay out of this series' business and let them add the gore kill scenes. The actor who plays Tommy in this movie is also forgetful. This is the last time we saw Tommy in the series. Part 4 through Jason Lives is the Tommy Jarvis trilogy of the Friday the 13th series. Whether some people like or don't like his performance as Tommy Jarvis, to me, in my own opinion, I have a hard time taking him seriously as Tommy Jarvis. He's a little goofy at times, but compared to John Shepard, he has somewhat a little bit more personality than Shepard's Jarvis, but not done as well as it could have been. If Jason was already dead, why did Tommy need to bring him back to life? Who the heck knows? Megan was our final girl again, just like Melanie Kinnaman. She's very bland and not interesting, but at the same time, I will admit, she's a very cliched, stereotypical dumb teenager, but her dumb decision in helping Tommy turned out to be the right thing to do. Also, her estranged and complicated relationship with her strict dad was also cliched. The sheriff character is an idiot. He doesn't believe Tommy that Jason is back no matter what he says, or keep finding dead body parts. He's also stupid believing Tommy's the one responsible for the murderers. How is this guy promoted sheriff? He couldn't be staff sergeant for how much he sucks at his job. Okay, I mean, yes. If you're a police officer and a former crazy mental patient like Tommy Jarvis said to the sheriff about that serial killer Jason Voorhees has come back from the dead, of course you're not going to believe him. When Jason kills and frames Tommy, of course the sheriff would arrest him thinking that he committed these crimes. I mean, who else would the sheriff suspect would have really killed these innocent people? Despite being a jerk to Tommy, at the same time, he had compassion protecting people and wanted to make sure the kids were safe. The romance with the sheriff's daughter and Tommy was so dumb it was forced. I really don't care if these two end up together or not. There's no chemistry. This is the first time and only time in the Friday the 13th movie series where the Camp Crystal Lake has kids at a campsite. We never saw this in previous movies. Anytime the camp was about to be reopened, Jason killed the counselor before the camp was starting. There's a part in this movie that always stood out to me as a little kid watching this movie. Seeing Jason walk inside the room where the kids are sleeping, he doesn't kill the kids. Some fans pointed out that maybe because kids are innocent, and that maybe that's why Jason does not kill the little kids, but I could be reading too deep into that. The part when you have these rednecks playing paintballs were pointless. They could have cut these characters out, it would not have any effect on the movie. I guess I just needed to add more kills for Jason. In the last movie, some guy impersonated Jason. In this movie, Jason is back. CJ Graham does an okay job in this movie as Jason, but to look at him as Jason looks like a repairman at Home Depot. I met CJ Graham back in 2013 at Chiller Theater. He was very nice. He told me he's friends with Kane Hodder, the next Jason actor. As I mentioned before, the opening cemetery scene was attributed to the classic Universal monsters. There's a story in the movie called Karloff, attributed reference to actor Boris Karloff, who played the original Universal monster Frankenstein monster in 1931. The one good part to this movie is they got 2 Alice Cooper songs added to the soundtrack to this movie, Teenage Frankenstein and The Man Behind the Mask. Despite it's cool to hear Alice Cooper songs in this movie, sadly it does not save the movie. Coming from someone who loves Alice Cooper's music, one of my first heavy metal singers I first got into at the time when I was a teenager. This is one of the few Friday the 13th movies with no nudity in it. There is a sex scene in the movie, but it's not very exploited, not like in The New Beginning. Despite I mentioned before I'm not much of a video gamer, I know that Tommy Jarvis is in the Friday the 13th video game that came out not that long ago. I did play that game a couple years ago. My brother-in-law. It was a pretty cool game, but I wasn't in a rush to go get whatever game system to play this game constantly. Just like New Beginning, there was an indie fan film called Never Hike Alone, where Tom Matthews reprised the role as Tommy Jarvis. I haven't seen this. I will check it out for curiosity. Just like in New Beginning, they also tried too hard to make this into a dark comedy. It's badly written. This movie's bad, dumb, stupid, lame, and it's just not one of my favorites of the series. And again, I rarely watch this movie. Whether you like Scream or not, but my own personal opinion, I would have rather watched a Scream movie over Jason Lives, but that's just my own opinion. Here are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This is the first Friday the 13th movie I saw as a little kid back in 2003. It was right around the time when Freddy vs. Jason was coming out. They were marathoning both franchises to promote the movie. One way of describing this movie was Jason vs. Carrie. This was originally supposed to be a Freddy vs. Jason movie, but around that time, because of legal rights issues, that's why they made this movie just another Friday the 13th movie. Now that could have been awesome and a perfect time-in to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie back in the 80s, when both franchises were popular around this time period. Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood was directed by John Carl Buechler, who is a very well-known special effects makeup artist. He did the special effects for movies like Reanimator, Dolls, the Ghoulie movies, From Beyond, Troll, A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, and Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. He worked with Stuart Gordon on a lot of his movies. John Carl Buechler is no longer with us. He passed away in 2019 from prostate cancer. Tina's another one of my favorite Friday the 13th actresses, and probably my favorite final girl in a Friday the 13th movie. She was likable, sympathetic. She was a very complex character, and I wish they brought this character back in the series. We see how she's dealing with grief and guilt, thinking that she was the one responsible for her father's death, despite he was a mean, abusive, alcoholic asshole. Also, people point out she was responsible for bringing Jason back without knowing who he was. In a way, the way I see it, that was just a misunderstanding. Just like Carrie, she's trying to learn and try to control her telekinetic powers, but she doesn't go deep into it like Carrie does. Also, just like Carrie, Tina has a little social anxiety for not having a lot of outside human contact or social life. The other difference is Tina's mom seemed like she was very nice. She was not a crazy, psychotic, religious nutjob mother like Margaret White was. I feel bad for Tina's mom when the psychiatrist used her as bait in order to get away from Jason. What a real asshole. The character Nick Tina takes a liking to is an okay character. Nothing really special. He's just basically there. That's it. I don't know why. He looks like Christopher Reeves to me. Or it could be just me thinking that. Despite Tina being the best character of the movie, she's the only one I remember well out of all the other characters. Again, same cliche characters we all know is going to live and die. You basically root for Jason to kill these teens because they are annoying and you don't care about except for Tina. But I will say this. I do remember the nerd character was so into sci-fi. It felt like a pre-Randy from Scream. But again, so cliche, annoying, and such a stereotype. Was this intentional, or how they all think that nerds are alike? I mean, I'm a nerd and proud of it, but I'm not a stereotype. It's so cliche when Melissa just uses him just to make Nick jealous. Well, it didn't work, you bitch. What a pisser. Melissa was a real bitch. So cliche. She likes Nick. Nick does not like her back. I don't care. And yes, I did like the scene when Jason killed Melissa. It wasn't a loss right there. Tell me, Rose, is Kill the Bitch still a tradition? Heidi Kozai plays one of the teenagers you all might recognize from 80s cult horror movies like Slumber Party Massacre 2, Cold Steel, and Society. William Butler plays Nick's cousin Michael, who was supposed to show up for a surprise birthday party planned by his girlfriend, but he ends up getting killed by Jason, and his girlfriend was also killed by Jason. You all might recognize him from cult horror movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. He also was in Terror Night, Buries Alive, and he played Tom in the Night of the Living Dead remake. He later went on to be a film director. He's directed a lot of indie horror movies, but I'm honestly not familiar with his movies he's directed. This is the first Jason movie at the beginning of the Kane Hodder playing Jason Voorhees. And yes, like any Friday the 13th fan, he is without a doubt probably my favorite Jason Voorhees actor / stuntman to play the character. He's the only stuntman to have played Jason more than once. He brings a lot of personality to the character. The way he kills his victim, he kills like he's on a roid rage, like he's a real mad angry like the Hulk. Then again, Kane Hodder is a real fit buff dude. His look as Jason is one of the best because at this point in time, Jason is a living dead zombie and has been through so much. He's all messed up. The lower part of his mask is broken off, his clothes are ripped to shreds, you see his ribs and bones, and he doesn't have a lot of skin on his body. I met Kane Hodder back in 2013 at Monster Mania. Real cool, chill dude down there, a very friendly guy. The part when Jason kills the young blonde who goes skinny dipping felt like a Jaws knockoff. The fight sequence between Jason and Tina where she uses her telekinetic powers against Jason is cool. She kicks Jason's ass and messes him up. Dr. Cruz, played by Terry Kaiser from Weekend at Bernie's, is a real jerk. He doesn't care about helping Tina. All he cares about is Tina's powers. It's not explained or mentioned, but my guess he wants to make a profit over her. What a jerk. Once again, the MPAA cut out all the good stuff and all the gore kill special effects. They are on the Blu-ray deleted scenes, but sadly, the video quality is not the best, but it's better than nothing. It was a little blurry and hard to tell what was going on. The cutaway scenes stink and ruin the magical, practical special effects. Sadly, the MPA waters it down, cutting out the good stuff. The part when he cuts and kills Dr. Cruz's character with the weed whacker could have been a great gore kill effect. It was not cut by the MPAA. Not a loss when Jason kills Dr. Cruz. It also stinks to cut out this awesome special effect when Jason squeezes a guy's head. It looks like squeezing a jelly donut. When Jason kills the girl in the sleeping bag, I will say that's a very creative kill in the series. In the original take, it was 3 hits, not 1, but the MPA told them to cut it to just 1 take. The highlight and best part of this movie is Jason vs. Tina. Great battles. It's my favorite Jason fight in the series. We see Jason unmasked. His zombie looks freaked me out as a little kid. The Jason costume and makeup effects are cool and awesome. You see the mark on his head when Jason got hit with a machete in part 4. The ending I noticed seems to be mixed for fans. To me, I can agree and see why that is, and not being a fan convinced that Tina's father saved her from Jason, and why do he look more human than a zombie form? I don't hate this, but I do wish Tina's dad looked like a zombie corpse, and maybe I would have wanted a little better satisfying ending. I'm not sure they knew how they wanted this movie to end, or it could have been a budget. You could also say this was a lazy ending to some degree. This was a fun one. It's my favorite Friday the 13th sequel of the series. This was a fun one. It's my favorite Friday the 13th sequel of the series, and part of it is because it was the first one I saw as a little kid. While it's not original, but they at least try to do something different as best as possible. Well, do you think this idea of Jason versus a girl with telekinetic powers sounds good or lame, but surprisingly this works out alright? Or heck, you may think the person who wrote this idea could have been high on drugs. After 6 previous movies, I've gotten burned out to the point seeing the same cliche format over and over again that I'm bored. See you next time in Manhattan. Or was it? Here are my comments on Jason Takes Manhattan. After 7 movies of Jason being in the woods in this movie, they put on the Big Apple for a change-up. Well, I like the concept of Jason being in New York City, but the title is misleading. The movie takes place on a boat half of the movie, and they only shot 1 scene in New York City in Times Square. This is a movie I have mixed feelings about. When I first saw this movie, I didn't like it, but after reading about the movie's production budget problems, I've kind of looked at this movie in a different way. New York City is one of the most expensive places to shoot a movie. They shot parts of the movie in Canada because it was cheaper there. Then again, Canada is a lot cheaper to make movies instead of New York City or California. If Paramount had given this movie a proper budget, shot a good portion of this movie in New York City, well, I would not say it would have been a great movie, but it could have had some potential to be a decent, solid movie. I read they originally wanted to shoot scenes at Madison Square Garden, the Metropolitan Museum, Empire State Building, and Yankee Stadium. Being a fan of the New York Yankees that I am, that would have been cool and awesome to see Jason Voorhees interrupting a Yankee game. Here's an idea. It actually could have been cool when Jason Voorhees interrupts a Yankee game. He could have killed one of the baseball players with a baseball bat in the head, and his head could have flown in the stands for a home run. But I don't think George Steinbrenner, the former owner of the New York Yankees, would not have allowed Paramount to shoot a horror movie at Yankee Stadium. This movie should have been called Jason on a Boat. Or heck, when they made this movie, they secretly called it Jason Takes Vancouver, which would have made more sense. Jason Takes Manhattan was directed by Rob Hedden, who prior to this directed episodes of the Friday the 13th TV show. And yes, believe it or not, there was a Friday the 13th TV series, but it had nothing to do with Jason Voorhees. I've never seen an episode of the show, so no comment, and I have no idea what the show was about. But from what I've learned from my friend Christian, He said that some of the producers of the Friday the 13th movies did work on the show. I'm not sure who to be honest. I'm sure you can look that up. This is originally supposed to be a follow-up sequel to Friday the 13th and New Blood. They originally wanted to bring back Tina Shepard, but because Part 7 was not a hit or success, they decided to go in a different direction and not bring her back for Jason Takes Manhattan. The part when the two characters think they are safe and roaming around Times Square, it does have some nice visuals of Times Square showing how Times Square was so different back in the 80s compared to what I'm used to seeing in modern day New York City today. When Rennie spots Jason, she runs away with her boyfriend Sean. I thought it was funny when Jason kicked a boombox for no reason. This was basically added for a little comedy humor. The gang are mad and upset and want to fight Jason. He takes his mask on. They're like, never mind. They run away. Their life is more important than some stupid boombox. Nowadays, people listen to music on their cell phones. If you look closer in the background in Times Square, rarely I mention Easter eggs. They have a movie poster of Tim Burton's Batman 1989. This movie came out the same year as Batman 1989. There was no competition between these movies. Batman, of course, won the battle, making more money than this movie at the box office that year. And this brings me to my point, continuity errors. The timeline of this movie takes place in the late 1990s, despite the character dressing up like the 80s. But back then they had no idea what the style of the 90s would be like a decade later. The second continuity error I noticed, in the first movie, Jason was a deformed, mentally challenged kid who needed special attention. In the flashbacks, Jason looks like a regular kid. In some flashbacks, Jason looks like he's okay. In other flashback sequences, he looks deformed like they did in the first movie. I don't think Rob Hinton or the writers did not care about continuity when they made this movie. The kills are not memorable as the previous movies, but again, the MPA did their usual job telling the editors to cut out the gore stuff. But I did like the part when Jason dumps the uncle in that green slime toxic waste, but he deserved it. Rennie's uncle was such an asshole, a piece of shit pedophile. I also like the part when the boxer is punching Jason, and after throwing a lot of punches, he gets tired and fatigued. Then Jason hits him hard in the head and decapitates him without using a machete or any other blade. They originally wanted to shoot that scene in Madison Square Garden, but instead it was shot at some random building. Rennie's background story was cliche and was just meh. It's like, again, I've seen this done better in other movies, trying to face your fears. The chemistry between her and her boyfriend Sean was just so weak and flat. The movie stars a very young and unknown Kelly Hu at the time, before she's a big famous actress a couple years later. She would star in movies like X2 as Lady Deathstrike. She was also in The Scorpion King with The Rock. When Rennie's kidnapped by a couple muggers, after they drug her, they are about to rape her, and Jason kills the muggers and saves Rennie's life. It makes Jason an anti-hero for 5 seconds. Fans complained and thought the ending in The New Blood was bad. This movie makes that ending look better. It's one of the weakest endings in the series, and it makes no sense. As Deadpool says, well, that's just lazy writing. I won't spoil it, give it a watch and prepare to be disappointed. It surprised me around this time when this movie came out. It's considered to be the longest runtime of the series, because usually these movies are usually over an hour and 30 minutes short. Our friend Chris Mano passed away last year. For someone who enjoyed bad movies, this was one bad movie he did not enjoy at all, and I can't remember why that is. He liked the concept Jason in New York City, which I agree with him on that one. Here's a little personal story. Back in 2019, we went on the Horror Sci-Fi Club field trip to New York City. I remember being at a store, seeing a t-shirt of Jason Takes Manhattan. I took a photo and sending to him a text picture joking, saying, "Your favorite movie." He responded back saying, "Laugh out loud," getting a kick out of it. When Rennie and Sean are running away from Jason, they try to hide in this restaurant. Jason breaks the door down, the head chef gets mad, and Jason shoves him to the side. The reason I bring this up is that stuntman is Ken Gersinger, a future Jason Voorhees stuntman in Freddy vs. Jason. Anytime I watch that joke, that's what replaced me as Jason in Freddy vs. Jason. This is the last Friday the 13th movie that Paramount made before they sold the rights to New Line Cinema for Freddy vs. Jason. This movie had an inspiration for Scream 6 because that movie also took place in New York City. If they had a bigger budget for Jason Takes Manhattan, that's how the movie should have been like. One of the movie posters for Scream 6 took inspiration from Jason Takes Manhattan movie poster. There's a scene in Scream 6 where one of the characters is watching Jason Takes Manhattan on television. A good concept with some potential, but sadly it was wasted. I don't hate or love this movie. I'm on the mixed fence on this movie. I can take it or leave it. I'll admit, the first half is boring when they are on the boat, and a semi picks up when they are in New York City. It's a misleading title that sounds cool, but when fans see it, they will be disappointed. I know because I was one of them and had the same reaction when I first saw this movie as a teenager. Sometimes occasionally I'll just watch clips on YouTube for the parts I liked in this movie, and sometimes I will suck it up and just watch the movie from start to finish. Also, my advice, if you want to watch a bad movie with your friends one night, this is it. Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, the 9th movie in the Friday the 13th series. How much lame recorded can you get? After 8 movies, I'm just burnt out at this point with the series. But I've gotten this far, I might as well see the series all the way through, and I can't cheat this. Yes, Christian, I know you like this movie. For me, this movie killed the series, is one of the weakest and one of the worst one of the series. I am not a fan of this movie. Did not like the idea that Jason was blown up and was transformed into different bodies to kill. Jason was barely in the movie. That opening felt like something to the ending of the movie, but no, it was the opening scene. The girl Jason chases after when it was all set up by the FBI and Jason falls into a trap, being shot, killed, and blown to pieces. She's one of the few Friday girls who was naked and not get killed by Jason. She's one of the lucky ones. This movie came out in the 90s when people were burnt out with the series at this point in time. Jason Goes to Hell was directed by Adam Marcus. Not a good time to be a Jason Voorhees fan. At this point in time, it was the 9th Friday the 13th movie. What else could they have done at this point with the series? With Paramount owning the rights to Jason Voorhees, they sold the rights to New Line Cinema. Also, another reason why they sold the rights was to make the possible Freddy vs. Jason movie crossover movie that was being developed around this time. They were also tricking us saying this will be the last one of the series. Yeah, right. We all know that turned out in part 4. That's like saying this will be my last cigarette, but instead you still have a hard time to quit smoking. According to what I read, despite this movie came out in 93, but the story takes place around the 2000s, and yet the characters dress up like it's the 90s. But again, they had no idea what the style of the 2000s would be like. It was also cool to see Kane Hodder outside of makeup, but watch out what you say, Kane, in front of Jason. Little did Kane Hodder know that Richard Grant's character was possessed by Jason. Kane Hodder says Jason was nothing but a big old pussy. After saying that, he ends up dead. It's sad Kane Hodder took a backseat in this movie, was barely in the movie as Jason. His look as Jason, his small screen time he has in this movie, the back of his head looks like a big giant meatball that exploded. Also, they don't explain how Jason Survivor came back from New York City, came back to Camp Crystal Lake. I know there's a comic book that explains this, but I never read that comic. I read when this movie came out, they sold the comic book on its opening night. If you hated this movie, at least you got a comic book. The comic book was probably better than this movie, possibly. It grossed me out when the coroner, played by Richard Grant, eats Jason's heart. To eat Jason's heart or not to eat Jason's heart? We all know which direction he goes in. The character Crane felt like they were going for a Dr. Loomis type character. This guy appears out of nowhere, and we never saw him in any of the previous Friday the 13th movies. I read that originally this part was offered to Tony Todd. Now that could have been awesome. I love Tony Todd. They were also going the Halloween route. If Jason killed all his family relatives' bloodline, he will die. Why didn't Jason have any other family blood relatives that we have not heard or been aware of, or seen the last Friday movies? It makes no sense. I hate it when they do that. When the demon worm Jason goes into other bodies, the part when he shaves the deputy's beard, since when did Jason care about appearances? It's not like he was posing for GQ magazine or being voted sexiest man alive. The characters in this movie are just, mediocre. Basically the same as I felt like the last couple of movies about the characters, with some exceptions. Jonathan Levy plays Stephen Freeman. According to my friend Christian, he was on an episode of the Friday the 13th TV series. It's hard to take him seriously, he can be a bit of a goofball at times, and yet he's the hero of this movie. We see that throughout the entire movie he's trying to fix his complicated relationship with his ex-wife. But honestly, I don't find this part that interesting, and I've seen this done better in other movies. His semi-small friendship acquaintance he has with Duke Crichton is alright, especially since he's the only one that believes him about Jason. While they were not friends, there was a little bit of mutual respect for one another. Kerrigan plays Jessica. She's the daughter of Diana Kimball, and she's the niece of Jason Voorhees. She's the final girl of this movie. Her boyfriend Stephen Cole, who she's dated, played by Robert Campbell, hosts a TV show called American Case File. He ends up getting possessed by Jason later in the movie. His TV show felt like a reference to Robert Stack's Unsolved Mysteries. She's an alright character, but there's not much to say about her. She's just there, that's it. And like I said before, she's the niece of Jason, and of course, she's trying to protect her baby from Jason. It's not her acting. The character's not interesting or well-written as she could have been. Despite not liking this movie, the one positive thing I will say is when Jason Demon Worm goes inside a new body. The old body dies. They feel like David Cronenberg grossed out body horror special effects. I wish I was talking about a David Cronenberg film right now instead of this movie. The part when Jason kills those two campers having sex in the tent, this is one of the goriest kills of the movie I've ever seen in the series. Jason stabs the girl while she's having sex on top of a guy, doing the cowgirl sex position, and then she gets split in half like bread. Finally, the MPAA took a vacation. We got to see the gross out special effects kills. The only thing about watching this movie is sets up Freddy vs. Jason. When you see Freddy's hand pop up and grab Jason's mask, it was not Robert Englund as Freddy in this scene, it was Kane Hodder's hand, but I would not count that as the only person for him to play Freddy and Jason. But sadly, because of this movie's failure, Freddy vs. Jason was postponed, not made until 10 years later. Again, another Easter egg. The Necronomicon book from Evil Dead is in this movie. How about that? Because later on, even though they never made Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, but they made the comic books later, it's like they were trying to get our hopes up that they were going to set up a cinematic universe where they have Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, Michael Myers, and Ash from Evil Dead, where they all like meet up and like fight. Clash of the Titans, or Slash of the Titans. Back in August, around my birthday month, I did a YouTube video on movies that came out the year I was born, 1993, and I forgot to mention this one. This one is not due for me. It's stupid, dumb, junk, a mess, and doesn't get any better for me no matter how many times I rewatch it to try to like this movie. Anytime I rewatch this movie, my brain shuts down, not caring about the story. It's like they had no idea what they wanted this movie to be. Another movie with potential, but it failed. Jason X, the 10th Friday the 13th movie. Jason went to Manhattan, hell, and now he's in space. Surprise, no Jason in Africa, Hawaii, California, Australia, or Italy. Jason Voorhees needs to go to Uranus next. Or Jason needs to get his ass to Mars. Or hey, why not make Jason / Thanksgiving or Jason Voorhees Christmas special? At this point, they really had nothing left to do. Producer Sean S. Cunningham admitted the reason why he made this movie was for money, and he's very frustrated having a hard time getting Freddy vs. Jason made. This was basically a distraction for him. Jason X was directed by James Isaac. He was mostly known as a special effects guy and worked on a lot of David Cronenberg movies. David Cronenberg was a big influence on him wanting to work on films. He also did special effects on Star Wars Return of the Jedi and Gremlins. He was mostly known for being a special effects guy and he rarely directed movies. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He passed away in 2012. It was written by Todd Farmer, who later go on to write the My Bloody Valentine 2009 remake. Despite my bad review of Jason Goes to Hell, I like this one. It's okay. Yes, it's not great, but it's a fun bad movie. It's not supposed to be taken seriously. My advice is to watch this with your friends and do a Mystery Theater 3000 night making fun of how bad and entertainingly bad this movie is. Just sit back, relax, eat some popcorn or candy and drink a soda, and watch Jason X in space. Also, we got to see more of Kane Hodder in this movie as Jason compared to the last movie. When Kane Hodder was offered to come back as Jason, he said he laughed how funny this idea was. And sadly, this is the last time he's played Jason in a Friday movie. He did play Jason in a recent video game. I'm not sure if you count that as canon or not. His look as Space Jason is pretty cool, badass, awesome, and original. They call him Uber Jason by fans. Back when I first saw this movie as a teenager, when I thought of the word Uber, I thought of this movie before Uber drivers were around and existed. Who knew the word Uber would mean something else 20 years later? Also, Jason looks like the Terminator when he turns into Uber Jason. Despite not looking like Uber Jason throughout the entire movie, it's worth the wait to see Jason turn into Uber Jason in the last half of the movie. When Jason and the girl are found by scientists 400 years later into the future, it reminds you a little bit of The Thing or like Captain America comic books before the Captain America movies. The way to get Jason away, he sends his people to have sex on board the spaceship. The Sub-Zero kill is one of the best kills of the series and very original. This kill is one of the most popular kills that fans like. I remember Mythbusters doing an episode on this death scene, but I don't remember what the results were in that episode. That was the only time I ever watched Mythbusters. This is another sci-fi movie that predicted virtual reality video games. It's funny how Jason kills the gamers twice, in the virtual game and in real life. The question is, he went to hell in the last movie, how did he get back? But who cares? At this point in time, the series continuity is all out the window. Characters from previous movies like Final Survivors, Chris, Jeannie, Tommy Jarvis, Tina, and Rennie are all dead at this point, 400 years later into the future. Also, some fans can debate about this movie being canon or not because it takes place after Freddy vs. Jason. The question is, did he go to space or is this movie just its own thing? David Cronenberg has a small cameo in this movie, which is very interesting. This was probably the first time I knew about who David Cronenberg was as a teenager before I saw or knew about him as a famous horror movie director, and he gets killed by Jason. Can only imagine if David Cronenberg directed a Friday the 13th movie despite he's a body horror director. But it would be an interesting attempt for him to try to direct a Friday the 13th movie. Again, the characters in this movie I've been saying throughout this entire video are not that memorable or hit or miss. It's the usual. These characters are very cliched. Look at Duke's character. I know this character's name is Rowan, but I don't know why. Anytime I watch this movie or bring this movie up in conversation with my friends, I always forget her name. An alright final girl, but again, not that much to say about or add about her, other than that she was frozen for about over 400 to 500 years and has a hard time adjusting to the future. Cliche character feels alone in the near-distant future with no one to connect to, and that everyone she knows from her time are long gone. Yeah, there's not much to say about this character. Professor Law was in a research team who wanted to keep Jason alive so he could make some money. He was a cliche greedy character like out of the Alien movies. Before Jason kills him, he tries to negotiate with him. He has a funny line before Jason killed him. He shouts, "It's okay, guys. He just wanted his machete back." When I first saw this, I laughed out loud, thinking to myself, oh my god, how much more cheesy can this movie get? Sergeant Brodsky, played by Peter Mansa, this guy was cool, awesome, and a badass. This guy was on a lot of horror sci-fi action movies in the 2000s. He was in 300. A solid character. The others could care less about or take it or leave them. I grew up watching Goosebumps, the TV show. I didn't realize that two actors who were on Goosebumps are in this movie. Dove Tienbach, who was on the episodes Bad Hair Day and the two-part episode The Ghost Next Door. I also remember he was in Harriet the Spy. I didn't realize that he was all over when I was a kid, when I used to watch movies as a kid. Melody Johnson was on an episode Be Careful What You Wish For. A lot of fans complain about this movie's crappy 2000s CGI special effects. And around that time period, that was common for fans to nitpick at bad CGI, and how it does not hold up today, which I can agree. That part of the virtual reality game, that monster CGI, is god-awful and crap. It does not hold up very well. This movie reminded me of Alien and Aliens. Just like Aliens was an action horror movie, so was this movie. In space, no one can hear you get slaughtered by Jason Voorhees. The female robot had to have been a homage in reference to Ash and Bishop from the Alien movies, but no coincidence right there. This android chick was pretty cool and badass, doing crazy flips. Her costumes, I looked, she was dressed like a dominatrix. Ironically, one of the main characters is named Dallas. Here's an idea: they did another Jason in Space movie. Jason fights aliens. But sadly, that was a missed opportunity for this movie. It will also probably never happen where Jason Voorhees fights the xenomorph aliens. When Jason's in the virtual reality to distract him, they pay tribute to Part 7, The New Blood, when Jason kills the two hot chicks in the sleeping bag. This time he hits the bag more than once. In Part 7, the MPA cut it to just one take. I guess they figured with the MPA not getting in the way, that's why they did this kill again from Part 7. Now, to get off top with these two hot chicks he killed in the virtual reality were hot. It's funny when they reference Star Trek and You Beam Us Up. It surprised me they got away with using that joke and not get sued by whoever studio that owns Star Trek. They also reference the gun BFG from Dune, which I've never seen, but I have little familiarity with that because of being a fan of David Lynch's movies. I read they did a comic book for this movie. They originally wanted to do a sequel, but the movie's failure prevented them from making another Jason X movie. I like to read that comic book for curiosity. Believe it or not, from what I've read and learned, there's a comic book where regular Jason fights Uber Jason. Interesting idea, I'm not sure that's possible. Not a great movie, still fun and entertaining. Don't take this movie seriously or try too hard. Just watch and have a blast with it. This movie's not even close to being canon from the past Friday the 13th movies. It was an interesting experience and see how they at least tried to do something different than what fans are used to. I mean, yes, same format cliches, but done in space. We've had Jason in space, Leprechaun in space, Pinhead in space. Who's next? Freddy in space, Chucky in space, or Michael Myers in space. You never know. Before I give my honest opinion on Freddy vs. Jason, I want to mention that I have a book on the making of Freddy vs. Jason called Slash of the Titans. It was written by Dustin McNeil, who's written a lot of good books on horror movies. He wrote books on the Halloween series and Halloween sequels we never got. I highly recommend those books. It shows like what the original script ideas were for Freddy vs. Jason. The original ideas were insane and crazy what they had in mind. The author interviewed some of the original writers, producers, and filmmakers who never made their script version of Freddy vs. Jason. I read this book a while ago, back when I got this as a birthday present. I don't remember everything about what the original scripts were, but I do remember some of the simple basic ones like Jason on trial. My first thought was, were they trying to mock the O.J. Simpson trial that was going on at the time that was so big and red hot, and the Freddy cult? As interesting as this would have been, but that could have gone either way. Also, they want to bring back original characters like Tommy Jarvis and Alice from A Nightmare on Elm Street teaming up to fight Freddy and Jason. Now that could have been awesome and cool. As I said before in the New Blood video, Part 7 was originally supposed to be a Freddy vs. Jason movie, but it was legal rights issues with Freddy being owned by New Line Cinema and Jason being owned by Paramount at the time. And I said this before, I'll say it again, the 80s would have been a perfect time to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie. After the way Jason Goes to Hell ended with seeing Freddy's glove, we finally got to see a Freddy vs. Jason movie after waiting for a decade. I remember this movie came out in 2003. I was 10 years old at the time. I remember being at summer camp and this movie got a lot of hype and attention, and the camp counselors would not stop talking about this movie. They said they liked it, how cool the fight scenes were. Because I was little at the time, I was not old enough to go see this in the movie theaters. I did not see this movie until I was 16 years old. Well, I don't hate or love this movie. The concept is cool. Two horror iconic characters facing off each other to see who's the better character. We got two awesome epic fight scene battles between Freddy and Jason, one in the dream world and one in Camp Crystal Lake. Nice visuals, decent direction by Ronnie Yu, how we got Freddy and Jason to fight each other. Robert Englund did a good job as Freddy Krueger in this movie, but too bad this is his last Freddy Krueger to date. Thankfully, Jason and Freddy's mom are both not named Pamela. Ha! Well, Ken Kersinger, he may be no Kane Hodder, but he did an alright job as Jason Voorhees. But some fans either like or don't like his performance as Jason Voorhees. Ironically, Ken Kersinger was in Jason Takes Manhattan as a waiter gets mad at Jason for damaging his restaurant, and Jason throws him to the side. Anytime I watch that scene, I joke, that's replacing me for Freddy vs. Jason. When I met Kane Hodder, I asked him why they recast him as Jason in this movie, and he said to this day, he still does not understand and know why that is. I like the kill scene that Jason does in this movie when he kills the kid on the bed after he has sex with his girlfriend. Also when Jason crashes the party and these stoners are making fun of him and he twists the one guy's neck. He gets on fire, throws a machete at the overweight guy. I met Ken Kersinger at Chiller Theater in 2015. Nice guy, friendly dude, but man was that guy so tall. As I said before, Kane Hodder was supposed to play Jason in this movie. Before being recast, he was set and ready to play Jason again, but sadly was replaced because Ronnie wanted someone taller than Kane Hodder. Ronnie said he wanted someone to tower over Freddy Krueger. A little stupid, I can see his point, but still. Even though Ken Kersinger is no Kane Hodder, he does an alright job as Jason. I'll admit, I'm a little less critical and harsh about his performance as Jason. As a teenager watching this movie, I don't think much about each stuntman's Jason performance or compare who was better. Don't get me wrong, nothing against Jason Voorhees. He doesn't have much personality like Freddy Krueger, Ash, Pinhead, or Chucky. He's simple and straightforward. He kills. That's it. He felt like a puppet being controlled by Freddy Krueger when he pretended to be his mother. He's a little bit one-dimensional compared to Kane Hodder's Jason. Not the same intelligence like Kane Hodder had as Jason. Or some fans debate Ken Kersinger did not have much personality in Jason like Kane Hodder did. Despite the recasting of Jason Voorhees, Kane Hodder and Ken Kersinger admit they're still good friends to this day. One minor nitpick I noticed in this movie is that Jason is afraid of water, which does make sense because he drowned in the first movie. But in the last few movies, Jason did not seem to be afraid of water when he killed his victims. Okay, this is going to be very nerdy of me to nitpick of me to say right here. The movie's big plot hole is that Jason lives in Camp Crystal Lake, which is in New Jersey, and Freddy Krueger is from Springwood, which is in Ohio supposedly. My question is, how did Jason walk from New Jersey to Ohio that fast? When Will, Laurie, Linderberg, and Kia bring Jason to Camp Crystal Lake in the movie, it's a short drive. In real life, that's a long drive. How do they have enough tranquilizers to keep Jason asleep is beyond my knowledge. As Will said, at least Jason gets home field advantage. They also bring back the Hypnocell pill they used in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. Nice homage. Freddy's a virus and quarantine the kids who had contact with him was a good concept. The movie's not perfect. I can agree that the characters in this movie are lame, cliche, not interesting. This is where the movie's a letdown. They're not memorable like previous characters from the original Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday movies. Kelly Rowland's character as Kia was so annoying. You're not even scary. Please, give me a break. When she falls asleep and Freddy cuts her nose in the dream, she wakes up and she's alright, no nosebleed. Fans complain that they forgot when Freddy gets his victims, they wake up with blood or scars, and it hurts them in the real world. But not Kia. The theory behind it is that Freddy was still weak and not strong enough. His powers were coming back slowly. The part when Kia is shouting insults and going yo mom on Freddy, Jason sneaks up behind her, kills her with his machete as a joke. Bitch, shut the fuck up. This is the Freddy vs. Jason movie, not the Yo Mama fight. Just like Jason X, once again, two actors who were on Goosebumps are in this movie. Katharine Isabelle and Brendan Fletcher. He was on the episode Werewolf of Fever Swamp, which is one of my favorite episodes of the series. Katharine Isabelle was in It Came Beneath the Sea. I met Katharine Isabelle. She was very nice. But sorry, no photo of meeting her. Katharine Isabelle is a good actress, but she's very cliched and straightforward. Nothing interesting about her character in this movie. She's very forgettable. You might recognize her from Ginger Snaps. I've heard of that movie, but I've never seen it. I didn't meet Brendan Fletcher. I've seen him twice at Chiller Theater. I hope to meet him someday in the future. Despite these characters are not the best, Brendan Fletcher as Mark was okay. He had some potential. I just wish he was kept alive longer, and they could have killed him in the end of this movie. I wish he was the main character of the movie. He knew a lot about Freddy Krueger for a character we've not seen the last Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Well, he's not the greatest or complex character written, but he had a lot more to offer than the other characters in this movie. The part when Mark is at school in the hallway telling Laurie about Freddy Krueger, if you look closely in the background, one of the extras is Evangeline Lilly, who will later go on to star in the TV show Lost, and as Wasp in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Ant-Man movies. Who knew? I met his brother that Freddy killed. He was in A Christmas Story, but I don't have a photo of him. I had a nice 5-minute chit-chat with him. It blows my mind that the bully from A Christmas Story was in this movie. I did not recognize him because he was all grown up at this point. Again, why did Freddy kill Mark's brother in between the movies that we did not see? I also met Linderman and Freeberg, but I did not get photos with them. I met half of these actors from the movie. Despite my insult on Kelly Rowland's character, I'll never meet Kelly Rowland at a con. She's too beautiful, way out of my league, and way above conventions. Ha! The actor who played Linderman was in Alpha Dog. That's a really good movie. Highly recommend that. Based on a true story about Jesse James Hollywood when he murdered 15-year-old teenager Nicholas Markowitz. The stoner character was a reference in mocking Jason Mewes from Jay and Silent Bob. There's a documentary on the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Jason Mewes shows up showing that he did not play Freebird in Freddy vs. Jason. As I'm ending this video, I mentioned before there are two actors from Goosebumps in this movie. I was wrong. Apparently there's 3 Goosebump actors. Freebird was in the Monster Blood episodes. Laurie and Will were boring characters with no personality, had no chemistry. Laurie was a basic cliche final girl character, not interesting. Despite Freddy killed her mother, I don't get any emotion out of this. It didn't work for me. Again, I've seen this done better on grief over the loss of a parent and other better movies than this. Paula Shaw did an okay job as Pamela Voorhees, but I do miss Betsy Palmer as Pamela Voorhees. They originally wanted Betsy Palmer to come back as Mrs. Voorhees, but she said she did not like the script of this movie. And that's just really sad. Ronnie Yu directed this movie, directed The Bride of Chucky a few years prior with John Ritter. Here he is directing Freddy vs. Jason with his son Jason Ritter. Like father, like son, they both worked with Ronnie Yu. Coincidence and ironic. Ronnie Yu is a well-known Hong Kong film director. I'm not familiar with his Hong Kong movies. He's well known for directing The Bride with White Hair. He directed a movie called Fearless with Jet Li. He also directed a movie with Brandon Lee called Legacy of Rage, a Hong Kong action movie, before Brandon Lee became famous in America. As someone who loves Brandon Lee and The Crow, that's one movie I've not seen of his yet. Before Ronnie Yu was picked to direct Freddy vs. Jason, they originally wanted Rob Zombie, Guillermo del Toro, and Wes Craven, which could have made sense and been interesting, especially how he directed the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie as the creator of Freddy Krueger. Stephen Norrington, who directed the first Blade movie, was offered to direct Freddy vs. Jason. Zombie, del Toro, and Craven turned it down, and Norrington, from what I read, he was either rejected or he may have turned down the job. It's interesting to read that Guillermo del Toro was offered the directing job to possibly direct a Freddy vs. Jason movie. That could have been interesting how his direction could have been if he had directed this movie, but we'll never know. Another minor complaint that I never realized or thought about until years later when I rewatched this movie is that Freddy Krueger only has 3 kills in this movie, He kills Mark, Laurie's mom, and kills the stoner character with Jason, killing him together, but it's a kill tie. Jason Voorhees has more kills in this movie than Freddy Krueger does. It's probably the lowest kills in a Freddy Krueger movie that I've ever seen. But then again, Freddy Krueger killed one person in the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie. As I said before, Robert Englund does a good job as Freddy Krueger in this movie. Sadly, this is the last time he's ever played Freddy Krueger to date. His performance in this movie is a combo between being scary and has his moments of funny one-liners. He's the one responsible for bringing Jason back, wanted Jason to kill temporarily until he felt strong and to kill, but he gets mad at Jason because Jason can't stop killing. When he fights Jason in the dream world, he has more power over Jason. In the real world, Freddy is weak. The movie opens up showing Freddy Krueger's past, which is something we've never seen before in any Nightmare on Elm Street movie before. Then they show random movie clips from the past Nightmare on Elm Street movies leading up to this movie. I'm not sure why they did not show any random past clips of the Friday the 13th franchise movies. As a horror fan, I wish they made more Versus movie like this. Think about how much money these movies would make. I wish they made Freddy vs. Jason vs. Michael Myers in the fight. That would have been cool and awesome. But sadly, it's probably never going to happen at this point in time because of legal rights issues and having the studio split 50% of the profits. I wish they would have made a sequel to this movie because this movie was not a big mega hit when it came out. That's why a sequel to Freddy vs. Jason was never made. This movie made some money, but not as much as the studio wanted it to make. When I first saw this movie, I remember watching the behind the scenes of interviews with the writers and producers. It was interesting and a shock of wow, they originally wanted to shoot an alternate ending where Freddy and Jason are fighting. Pinhead shows up from hell saying, "Gentlemen, what seems to be the problem?" That could have been awesome. But the problem was that New Line Cinema could not get the rights to Pinhead, and the budget would have cost a lot of money to shoot an ending like that. Having met Doug Bradley, aka Pinhead at Monster Mania last month, we had a nice conversation on why a Michael Myers vs. Pinhead movie was never made. Long story short, he told me that John Carpenter and Clive Barker were both on board and working the movie together, where Carpenter would have directed it and Barker would have written it. What happened was the reason why this movie was never made. Mustafa Akkad, who was the founder of the Halloween franchise, said no. Now that sucks, and that would have been cool and awesome. Two iconic horror legends, Carpenter and Barker, making a movie together. Mustafa Akkad said he was not up for the idea of a Michael Myers vs. Pinhead crossover movie, and he said he was not feeling it would work. Now that sucks. And think how cool it would have been to have two horror iconic legends, Carpenter and Barker, making a movie together. I have read the Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash comics. They were good and fun, not the same as watching a movie. I'll admit, it's been a long time since I've read those comic books. The first comic was pretty good, decent and solid, not great, just okay. It had a little Christmas theme to it. There's your next movie, Jason Voorhees at Christmas. But that's as close as you get to a Jason Voorhees Christmas. The second comic book, that was really over the top. Also a little bit too political, just too much for me to handle. But again, it's been a long time since I've read the second comic book. I might want to reread it again. Freddy Krueger going up against Washington Congress, I'm thinking, what were they thinking? Or what the heck were they smoking? Another reason why Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash movie was never made because Bruce Campbell said he does not like the idea of crossovers. I'm not sure how true this is. I once read that Sam Raimi was offered to direct the sequel, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. For what I remember reading, he either turned it down because the studio would not allow him to have control, he wanted to direct the movie, or just like Bruce Campbell, he did not like the idea of Ash crossing over with Freddy and Jason. If they made a sequel with Ash in the fight, it definitely would have made sense for Sam Raimi to direct Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, because he directed the Evil Dead franchise and created the character Ash. Well, it's not a perfect movie because this movie was in development hell for so many years. This movie had a lot more potential to be done better, but that's what happens with a certain movie like this. After when you have original script ideas that were rejected, they took way too long, they move on. When it's finally made, it either works or does not work when trying to satisfy fans. Despite the movie's flaws, I still enjoy it for what it is. The real highlight to this movie is Freddy and Jason fighting, that's it. Just like Jason Takes Manhattan, this is another movie I'll watch clips on YouTube to watch my favorite parts. But I will man up and watch it from start to finish like I did for this video review. One thing I agree with people about this movie is that the movie does not have a balance of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie or a Friday the 13th movie. It feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie with Jason added and trapped in the movie. It's another kind of movie. Sit back, relax, eat a snack, drink whatever soda you like, and watch Freddy and Jason kick each other's asses. It's a movie where you don't care about the story or characters. You just want to see Freddy and Jason fight each other. That's it. Despite talking about Freddy vs. Jason in this Friday the 13th video, you will see a solo video coming up from a podcast clip I did with my friend and buddy, Wolfman Sam, where we discuss Freddy vs. Jason. Here are my thoughts on the 2009 Friday the 13th remake. After Jason takes Manhattan, goes to hell, goes to space, and fighting Freddy Krueger, at this point in time, the next step in the franchise was remaking it. That's what happens after making too many crappy sequels. I was 15 around the time when this remake came out. I did not see it in the movie theaters at the time it came out. I was not old enough to go see it in the movie theaters by myself, and I was still scared of horror movies around that time in February 2009. And despite 2009 was the year I finally got over my fears of horror movies, and was finally watching horror movies, but that was later that year. After seeing all the Friday the 13th movies around that time, I checked out the remake 1 year later in 2010. Was not a fan, very disappointed in it. I moved on after that, did not rewatch this movie again until 2020, when we were on lockdown during COVID, because around that time in 2020 was the 40th anniversary of the first Friday the 13th movie. I marathoned all the Friday the 13th movies while we were all on lockdown, while working on my gym basement for background noise, and of course recently rewatched this for the remake for this video. Well, in rewatching, it occurred to me how they were doing the same thing as all other horror remakes of the 2000s. It was trying too hard to appeal and please the modern teen audiences at that time. Unlike the Psycho remake from 1990 that was shot for shot, this movie, not really shot for shot, it did manage and try to change things up a little bit. Instead of Jason's mother being the killer, she's in the movie for only a few minutes, and they paid homage to past Friday the 13th movies like the first, second, and third movie. For instance, when he pretended to be Jason's mom like Ginny was trying to be in part 2. But honestly, Ginny did it better. Jason wearing a sack mask like in part 2 looked like a killer hillbilly until part 3 when Jason wears the hockey mask. They paid homage to the fight scene from part 3. Jason's mother getting her head chopped off from part 1. They also paid tribute in reference to part 7 with the sleeping bag hill. The only difference is Jason burns the person in the sleeping bag. A good change-up. Don't take this personal or be offended when I say this. Jared Padalecki, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, who was on the W horror TV show Supernatural. I've never seen an episode of that series, but I remember how big and popular that show was around that time in the 2000s. I was a little familiar with Jared Padalecki as an actor before his big breakout on Supernatural, from seeing him make small appearances in movies and TV shows. He was also in the 2005 god-awful House of Wax remake. It's also ironic around this time when the Friday the 13th remake came out, his co-star Jensen Ackles from Supernatural was in the My Bloody Valentine remake. They were in two different 80s horror remakes around the same time. But if I had to pick one, the My Bloody Valentine remake was better remake around that time. But still, the original My Bloody Valentine is an okay movie. There's an idea for a movie. Supernatural vs. Jason. His character's alright, he's nothing special. He's basically looking for his younger sister who went missing because Jason Voorhees kidnapped her. You sympathize with him making sure he finds his younger sister. His character's very simple and straightforward. His character's like Rob from part 4. The only difference is Rob was looking for Jason to kill him because he killed his sister in part 2. Whereas Clay's sister is still alive, was kidnapped by Jason. Unlike Rob, Clay had no idea who Jason Voorhees was. He has decent okay chemistry with Danielle Panabaker. Around this time I remember her from the Disney 2005 Sky High movie. She's had a successful career as an actress beyond the TV show Flash. Jenna was nice to Clay, helping him find his sister. The character Trent was such an asshole. He was a bully to Clay. I remember this actor was in the first Transformers movie playing another forgetful bully. It's not explained why Jason kidnaps Clay's younger sister. It's not like in the Rob Zombie Halloween remake when he tries to use body language on Laurie Strode, telling her they are related and siblings. It's one of the few rare times in this series I've ever seen Jason Voorhees hold a hostage. Derek Mears' Jason Voorhees does an okay job. He's no Kane Hodder. He's very ruthless, brutal, strong, and fast. He was like 100 in this movie. That's saying the man's the most dangerous game. Or is like one of the characters in the Wrong Turn series. The way he killed Chewie was very brutal. I'm not sure what object that was that he used to kill Chewie. As a teen watching this movie, I really hated it. Rewatching it for the third time, I don't hate this movie. It's just not a go-to Friday the 13th movie for me. I find it very bland, forgetful, boring, and not interesting. It's a movie I don't have a lot to say about. It's one of the weakest remakes horrors of the 2000s. I can take it or leave it with this movie. It's basically the same simple cliche, stupid, dumb characters doing the same old stuff they should not be doing in order to survive Jason Voorhees. There are two different cuts of this movie. I'm not comparing both cuts, but I will say the first time I saw this on cable TV, it was probably the regular cut. I saw the uncut last year on the Friday the 13th Blu-ray collection, but I highly doubt the uncut version makes the movie any better. Not only was this a remake of the first Friday the 13th movie, it had other elements from the other Friday the 13th movie sequels. We've gone almost 15 years without another Jason Voorhees movie. Lord knows if they'll ever make another Friday the 13th movie. After this movie's failure, they originally intended to make a sequel and start a new series, but because of this movie's failure, the sequel was cancelled. I read that the original sequel idea to this movie was have the movie take place in the wintertime for a little change in season. The question is, will it be a requel, remake/sequel as the new Scream movie series says? Sorry Christian for mentioning Scream. Will they ignore the previous sequels and bring back either Alice or Tommy Jarvis? Or separate two different series, just like what they did with the 2018 Halloween sequels, ignore the previous ones, and also Exorcist Believer. So that was my thoughts and review of all the Friday the 13th series, and hope you all enjoyed my comments and thoughts, and hope this is a slight improvement from the 2018 Friday the 13th podcast we did together. Thank you, Christian, for having me a part of this. See y'all next time.